All right. So let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to call the Budget Committee, Clackamas County Budget Committee together. Obviously, we're doing this virtually. And first off, I'd like to invite staff to introduce themselves.
I'll start. I'm Gary Schmidt, County Administrator, and I will introduce Elizabeth Comfort, Interim Finance Director. And Elizabeth, if you would introduce your team, please.
Yes. Thank you, Gary. Yes, I'm Elizabeth Comfort, Interim Finance Director. And with us are the budget team. We have Blaze Riggins, who's our Senior Analyst, Jeanne Yang, who is our Analyst, and Roxanne Fisher, our other Analyst, and Todd Burton, who is our Interim Budget Manager Advisor.
And thank you. Our other staff, Dylan Blaylock from Public and Government Affairs, will be the moderator today for the public hearing, or actually there's no public comment today, so I'm sorry, but Dylan will help us facilitate the meeting, as will Drenda Howitt, Commission Staff Manager. She will facilitate the raise hand functions. So committee members, when you wish to speak today, if you would please raise your hand in the chat function. Also, we have staff Kevin Galusha from Technology Services, Rich Marvin and Garrett Teague from Public and Government Affairs. They are helping with the recording and making sure things go smoothly with technology. So that is our staff today, Chair.
All right, so why don't we have the Budget Committee members introduce themselves, and we'll start with Tom.
Tom Feely, citizen member. It's my 4th year on the Budget Committee.
Sean?
John Caldwell, citizen member.
Golda Park, citizen member.
Ann Lee, citizen member.
Ken?
County Commissioner Ken Humberston.
I'm Clackamas County Chair Jim Bernard.
Paul Savis, Clackamas County Commissioner.
Sonia?
Sonia Fisher, Clackamas County Commissioner. Good morning, everyone.
Martha?
Martha Schrader, Clackamas County Commissioner. Good morning.
Good morning. I believe that's all of us. Well, we start the day with so today is today the 27th, and we're convening the Budget Committee, and we'll start with election of officers.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I don't see the raise hand button on my screen this time, but anyway, I'm raising my hand.
All right.
I'd like to nominate Wilda Parks to be chair of the Budget Committee for the 2021 budget year.
I'd like to second. All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any further nominations? All right, with that, all those in favor of Wilda as the chair of the Budget Committee say aye.
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 Hi.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. And Wilda, I'm going to turn the gavel over to you to elect a secretary.
Thank you very much. There's my gavel. Nominations for secretary. This is probably the easiest position on the Budget Committee. Do we have any nominations for secretary?
I would nominate Sean.
Sean Caldwell. Okay, is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to elect Sean to the office of Secretary of the Budget Committee. Any other nominations? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye or holding up your hand. Either one.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. So moved. The next item is for a citizen member of the Budget Committee to serve on the Audit Committee. If I remember correctly, Ms. Caldwell, is that you at this point?
Yes, I served in the last year. I'm not sure how long the term lasts. If I was just finishing the last term, or anyway.
And if there were a nomination and election today, you would be willing to continue to serve on that?
I would.
Okay.
I'd like to nominate Sean Caldwell to serve on the Audit Committee.
Second.
Okay, is there a second to that?
Paul seconded.
Okay, okay, very good. Thank you. Any other nominations? Hearing none. All those in favor of Ms. Caldwell serving on the audit committee, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand, either one.
Aye.
Or both.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. County Administrator Gary Schmidt, would you please deliver the budget message?
Yes, thank you, Chair Parks, members of the Budget Committee. It is my pleasure to present to you the Clackamas County 2020-2021 budget message. But first, I'd like to take you back 177 years ago. 177 years ago was when Clackamas County was formed. In 1843, and it was one of the first 4 original districts created by the Oregon Provisional Legislature. July 5th, 1843. And for the last 177 years, Clackamas County has led the way, has been a trailblazer, not only in the creation of Oregon as a state, but in ways to best serve our growing region, our growing nation, and of course, the public of Clackamas County. At one point, when Clackamas County was first formed, the county covered more than 4 current states, from the San Francisco area all the way up to British Columbia, Canada. We have been trendsetters ever since, and this is no different 177 years later, when we are faced with insurmountable challenges that we never have experienced as a people before. And I'm speaking of a thing called COVID-19. We still are trendsetters, working to find ways to serve our public and continuing our good work here at Clackamas County. And I frame this story in the proposed budget you have before you today. The proposed budget for fiscal year 2020-2021 for the general county funds is $892,167,337, including the 7 county service districts. The total Clackamas County proposed budget is $1.2 billion. As far as some high-level accomplishments that the county has achieved, I guess I want to start right with COVID-19. It was unexpected, but I'm very proud of how our staff and our commissioners and our community has come together to continue to be the trendsetters we have been for the last 177 years. We were the first local government in the entire state of Oregon to declare a state of emergency, certainly the first county government to do so. Our Emergency Operations Center has been up and running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the last 3 months. 100% of county departments have continuity of operation plans, which have been put into effect. Some quick examples of departments: our Transportation and Development Department put permitting entirely online within 2 weeks, where other jurisdictions took 12 weeks to 6 months to do the very same at high costs. Our Business and Community Services Department is preparing support packages for small businesses as we speak. And our Technology Services Department got the majority of employees up and working remotely in a matter of days so that we can continue providing services to the public. Outside of COVID-19, I'm most proud that our county commissioners revised their strategic plan for Clackamas County, really narrowing their goals for the next 2 years down to 12 priorities over the next 2 years. And as part of the Performance Clackamas plan, it's in my budget message. I know you can't see this, but it's online. And these are the 12 priorities of which we help make budget proposed decisions for you today. Also very timely, and just in the last week, our county chief audit executive published a financial condition report, which we sent to all of you and is also posted online. And I'll read the title: Financial Condition of Clackamas County as of May 2020. Increasing internal service costs and aging assets may challenge the county in uncertain post-COVID-19 economic future. You can find this report online, and we've sent it to you. Of course, you can read that report for yourself, but one highlight I want to mention to you, and that is Clackamas County had surpluses, meaning more revenues than expenditures, between the fiscal years 2007 to 2011. And then that changed in fiscal year 2012, where expenses were greater than revenues. So we've been talking about this, budget members, for at least 1.5 years now, but this predates even the last 1.5 years we've been talking. This goes back to fiscal year 2012, where expenses were greater than revenues at Clackamas County. And that occurred in 3 fiscal years, fiscal year 2012, fiscal year 2016, and fiscal year 2018. Last year, as we were preparing for the current fiscal year, as you know, but I want to restate, we noticed that expenses were outpacing revenues, and we were again up for a year of a structural deficit. But thanks to your leadership and work, we, of course, had a balanced budget and worked towards eliminating that structural deficit. We did make $12 million in cuts to general funded programs in this current fiscal year. Most departments made about a 5% cut in general funded programs. Some departments made a little more, some made a little less. It was an average of 5% cuts, yet we still were short to create a balanced budget. We were $5 million short. And that's where I proposed and you accepted using one-time only funds to close that $5 million gap, knowing we could not do that again. And we did that, and we balanced the budget for the current fiscal year. But we still had a sustainability issue where going forward, we did not have a structurally balanced budget going forward. Again, we balanced the budget as required by law, but we did not have a sustainable budget. Since July 1st, I did enact a hiring freeze for all positions at Clackamas County with an exception process. We created a staff budget task force, created of financial experts within various county departments who helped advise myself and the budget team on how to prepare for this current fiscal year budget. We did attempt to do zero-based budgeting, which is what I shared with all of you last year during these times. It was a challenge to do so because of some systems and processes that needed to be in place at Clackamas County. So we put a pause on zero-based budgeting until this coming July. We'll do that for the following fiscal year. And I'm pleased that our finance staff has done phenomenal work under the leadership of Elizabeth to get those systems and processes in place. Namely, as you know, we purchased budgeting software that's going to help us moving forward from a company called OpenGov. We're revising our chart of accounts, and we are helping to update our forecasting model so it is much more as accurate as it can be, knowing that it's a forecast. So that was just for the current fiscal year. Going into this fiscal year, we still have an unsustainable budget, as we've talked about with you. You agreed, a budget committee, when you last met in April, to stabilize the budget over a 2 to 3 year fiscal year period instead of doing it all at once. That minimizes the amounts of cuts we need to make, so it's less drastic this year, but rather the message is the proposed cuts you see this year is not the end. There will be proposed cuts over the next 2 or 3 fiscal years, depending on what final decisions you make this week. And all of this was before COVID-19, by the way. We had a sustainability issue before COVID hit. But let's still pause a moment in time before COVID hit. So our current general fund projection for the upcoming fiscal year is $135 million, a slight decline from the current fiscal year. We have to make at least $4 million in cuts in the general fund to have a balanced budget. At the start of the year, I asked departments to provide 3 budget reduction scenarios of 5%, 10%, and 15%. All departments did that. The departments had guidelines on how to make those proposed reductions, which we also provided that document to you, Budget Committee members, earlier in the year. But quickly, they had to be tied. The reductions had to be mindful of the board's strategic goals and department's strategic goals. The goal was that no existing staff funded by the general fund would be eliminated. We would eliminate vacant FTEs, but not current FTEs. That the intent was to look at programs that could be reduced or eliminated rather than, quote, thinning the soup, and not to make cuts that there was no way the Board of Commissioners or the Budget Committee would take. Knowing that there's no way they take those cuts, why would you propose them in the first place? Not to make political proposals. So that's what departments did. Myself, working with the Budget Committee, reviewed those proposals, knowing we had a $4 million general fund gap to meet at minimum. I am proposing beyond the $4 million in general fund reductions. It's actually 6 point. Let me quote this exactly. It is, pardon me, $6.1 million in reductions. I'm pleased to say that that is of no existing FTE reductions, but there are vacancy reductions in that. These cuts were not easy to make, but something I've been talking about since I've been the county administrator now for 15 months, is to create a one county, one team approach that we serve the public of Clackamas County, all 22 departments. And the work that departments do, while key and important, departments need to look beyond their department and what is the best interest of our entire organization as we strive to serve the public of Clackamas County. And that was the intent of which the proposed reductions were made. Some other systems we put in place, general funded contingencies that were remaining in departments. We have pulled them out of department reserves and put them back into the general fund where they belong. And departments can ask for those funds, but it will go through a budget process, which had not been occurring before. Page 9 of my budget message outlines the proposed reduction packages by department. As I said last year, I'll share with you now that the reductions are equitable. They are not equal. They are equitable, not equal. I did not ask every department to take a flat number of reduction, but I did what I believe are equitable, meaning fair reductions based on the department, the amount of general fund they receive, and the services that they provide. So, my message is going forward, we still do not have a sustainable budget. We have a balanced budget with this proposed budget. There will be more cuts that need to be made over the next 2 to 3 fiscal years to obtain a sustainable budget. COVID-19, based on our projections, it appears we are okay as far as the general fund for the upcoming fiscal year. But as you know, as is the case during the 2008 recession, local governments see the impact 1 to 2 years later. And so we are predicting a general fund reduction over the following 2 fiscal years, not immediately, but we will face it, which will make our need to make deeper cuts into the following years a reality. We did decide, or Elizabeth and I are proposing, that we are providing you a budget at this moment in time. You know, and I know it's going to change. We have the state forecast has made drastic reduction in state funding. We don't know exactly what those will be yet, but it will absolutely impact our budgets. So we'll have to do supplemental budgets going forward, probably immediately after July 1st. But our suggestion is we simply can't wait to do that. We need to provide a proposed budget and an adopted budget, knowing that it's going to change over a period of time. I do say respectfully, budget committee members, all I provide to you is a proposed budget. It is now your decision what you accept and what you don't. If you do decide to reinstate any of the proposed cuts that I have made, then that means there will have to be other cuts made. So I'll ask for your guidance. If you do choose to reinstate any of these proposed reductions, what would you like to trim instead? Because unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of reinstating many of these reductions. I do want to stop so that we can have time for questions, but quickly, we have ongoing future issues that still have not been addressed, such as the county courthouse. There is approximately $1.3 million in the non-departmental fund, which you'll hear more about later tomorrow, to continue with planning for the courthouse, but we have not brought to the Board of Commissioners a final proposal yet on how to fund the county courthouse. There still is a need for a county courthouse, but how to fund that in the times of COVID are still uncertain, but staff is finalizing proposals to bring back to the Board of County Commissioners. The Equal Pay Act, we will have a first look at the study being completed by our consultants next week, actually, the month of June, although I believe that's slightly delayed because of COVID. We have put some more money in reserves to prepare for that, which we'll talk about later during the next day. We have an Oak Lodge and Gladstone Library to help support, an enterprise resource planning system to support, and other infrastructure needs at the organization. And quickly, because you've asked, the small grants program is still funded in this budget in the non-departmental account for the same amount of $250,000. So that is my proposal to go forward. I will stop at this point. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And I'll just finally thank the budget team for their fantastic work in helping to prepare this budget. Elizabeth Comfort, Interim Finance Director, Blaise Riggins, Jian Zhang, Roxanne Fisher, the budget team, Todd Burton, who's temporarily come on board to help us prepare this budget. And I do want to thank Doug Waugh, the Finance Manager in Water Environment Services. He was loaned to help us prepare this budget, and he did that. And I'm very grateful for Doug demonstrating the one county, one team approach I'm talking about, where he went beyond West and helped us countywide preparing this budget. So with that, I'm happy to entertain your questions, and I'll ask Elizabeth to help me answer your questions as well.
If I may, first of all, before we begin that, I need a process question. I mean, I'm looking at the hands raised, but I can't tell who raised them first, second, third, whatever. So is someone going to help with that? Is that you, Drenda?
Yes, and I will tell Chair Parks that the hands raised are in the order raised. So you'll see Paul Savas, Sean Coldwell, Tom Feely. So whoever raised first is at the top.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate it. And also, as we go through the entire budget system, there were a great number of questions that were asked ahead of time. And I'd like to make sure that those questions were answered in whatever responses, like from Gary's response and from the different department head responses, or do we still need to have more conversation about those? So I don't know how we tell the difference between what's a new question and what's a reiteration, but just note that. And then also timing, we're scheduled to begin the department presentations in just about 15, 16 minutes. So just keeping that in mind, everyone. Okay, so Drenda, we have Paul first, and will you call on the hands raised? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Chair, may I answer your questions very quickly, please, first?
Yes. Yes.
We've asked all department directors to please answer the questions that were provided in advance during their presentations today. I, for example, attempted to do that with the questions I saw from you all in advance. But if not, we will make sure, Elizabeth and team, that if they are not addressed during the presentations, you will get an email response, hopefully at the end of today or as we go. So we'll make sure.
And I noticed that, and I thank you for that, Gary, because as I went through the general questions, I did notice that you were addressing all the ones that I could see on our lists at this point in time. So thank you for that. I think the only question I would have of you and the other budget committee members may still want to know in our question about citizen members being involved in the supplemental budgets going forward, the response was, we will keep the budget committee members informed throughout the year. So will we only be informed, or will those be discussed at our quarterly meetings and we are able to have input? I'm not sure how that works.
I'll start. You absolutely will have input. It's not required by law that as a budget committee, you approve the supplemental budgets after the fiscal year starts, but I certainly would want your input. I will throw this out. If you want to meet monthly starting in July, I would, don't kill me, Elizabeth. I'd be open to that. You can give in-time input, but absolutely, we need your guidance and input as we go.
Okay, all right, thank you. I appreciate that. And then Drenda, let's go ahead with the questions then. Thank you.
Mr. Savas?
Yeah, so Gary, before I start with my questions, I just want to confirm what you said. So you're indicating that this budget is not structurally balanced, correct?
That's what I said, correct.
Okay, thank you. So my first question on page 7, under your budget message, under contingency, it states that, you know, the 5% general fund, the general fund contingency is budgeted 20.1 million. An additional 8.4 and an additional 1.3. So is that part of the 20.1? And my question really is really trying to get to 5% of what number?
Let me see. I have a detail on this.
I will ask Elizabeth to help me answer that question, please.
Yeah, there are two. So contingency is based on the total expenditures. So, and then we have reserves, which are based on our property tax revenues. And I do have a detail on that, but let me pull that together and I can get that to you. But there are two policies. One is a 5% and one is a 10%, 5% contingency on operations.
Okay, so they shouldn't, what you're saying is the contingency shouldn't be half of what the 10% reserves number is.
No, because they're based on the reserve, and the contingencies are based off of two different numbers. Okay. So they're not, they won't be related.
Okay, so then my when you get the answer to that, that'd be great. So getting
Yeah,
down.
I apologize. I don't have it on my fingertips right here.
Okay, so getting down to the reserves on the same page under reserves, the 10% number is listed. The 2020 budget includes a 17.5 million. So should I assume that the tax revenues are 175 million?
Tax revenues are 135 million.
Okay, so then so what's the 17.5 reflect?
Let me get that detail for you. I do have that, but it won't take the time right now. Let me get that to you. We do have it specifically broken down, what the contingency is made up of and those reserves.
Okay. Yeah, because I think really my other follow-ups are kind of related to your responses. So I guess I'll just put that on pause and let everyone ask their questions. But I
have it right here.
Okay.
I apologize. So in the contingency, it's 29 million, and that includes 20 million, which is the 5% of the operations. And then we also have the 8.4, which is a C800 reserve. It's proceeds from the C800 bond, the GO bond, and then the 1.3 million, which is set aside, identified for the pay equity. And then the 17 million is for the reserves that we've set aside to meet our policy decision on what we should have set aside. 3 million is for PERS. And then we have 263,000 set aside for the clerk record storage.
Okay, that actually helps me actually to the next one. And that's so the 1.3 million for the equal pay is, my understanding is that maybe we were trying to strive to get 10 million for equal pay set aside. Is that about right?
I had not heard that there was a target, so I need to work with Evelyn on that.
Okay, because my concern is I know it's a guess. We don't know what the equal pay impacts are going to be, but my concern is that we're not putting away enough. And if I heard correctly, and Gary, maybe you can, or Elizabeth can help, is this a 3-year program or a 2-year program or a 1-year program that gets us to a structurally sustainable budget? I mean, I need to understand where we're going, because it doesn't feel as though we're making progress on getting a sustainable budget.
You're absolutely correct. So our forecast is constantly moving. I have been updating it now with Blaze on actually inputting some first 3-year guesses, approximations for the equity pay. We have the library loan that we now have some better numbers to put in. We've made some changes about our decision on moving forward with an ERP financial software system. And then we're also trying to anticipate reductions in property tax. So our revenues are changing as well. So these changes, as we learn, I'm putting them into the forecast, which creates a changing bottom line of what that sustainability number needs to be when we're trying to have operating revenues cover our operating expenditures. So based on what those revenues continue to look like is what we have to, how we have to change those expenditures to match. So at this time, we could say, $2 to $4 million in future reductions each year of our current operations. But that may change as we look to what our revenue stream is going to be. So Commissioner Savas, you're asking great questions, and these are the questions we ask every day too. And as we gather more and we understand more of the changing factors and inputs into those forecasts, we can make better decisions, each day for each year. But it will be very fluid as we go forward.
Yeah, well, thank you, Elizabeth. And I totally understand we can't predict the future, and I understand you're doing the best you can, and under the circumstances. So I understand that there's some, some unanticipated, so to speak. We're trying to figure out where we're going to go, but I think we need to have some kind of a roadmap, rough roadmap of where we're going and when and what our target is. When do we want to be sustainable? When do we think we can get there? And I know that we can't get that perfect. We're estimating. It's all about estimates. But I can't sit here today. I say this every year. Well, not every year, but the last couple especially. That this is very bothersome to me to the core. And I need to have a roadmap, and I need to understand how we're going to get there and what we're doing. It seems like, you can say at one point we need to tear the Band-Aid off completely, or we can just tear it off very slowly. But I need to know when the Band-Aid is going to come off. I need to know when we're to be healed, and that's critical. And it's just troubling for me. I don't see that in the budget message, Gary. Please help me. When are we going to get there, roughly?
And I'd like to just remind everybody, we have about 10, maybe at the most 15 minutes. And I notice we have 4 other people. So can we answer that succinctly and then move on to the other questions?
Yes, it is my intent to just stabilize the budget as soon as possible, but that also comes to the political will that this group is willing to make. The political, that's the wrong word. The tough decisions you're willing to make. We're all working together on this. Every department director, myself, the budget team, and you as the budget committee. How deep do you want to go is the question, and how fast do you want to do it? But my goal is to have a sustainable budget. I would like to say next year, and I'll be quoted on it, but as soon as possible. But there's tough decisions that need to be made that you have to make.
That does not sound like a plan, but I'll accept it.
Ms. Coldwell?
Thank you. Gary, when you were talking about the budget being non-sustainable, I'm assuming you mean that there's one-time only money included here that is being used for ongoing program costs?
That is partly true, yes. At its base level, I'm using general fund as an example. The income we receive from the general fund, our expenses are higher than that. So every year we're struggling to find the pots of money to help continue our ongoing operations. And really that shouldn't be the case for an organization. We should spend within the means of resources that we have.
And
so,
was there an attempt to align one-time only revenues with one-time only expenses in the budget?
Elizabeth, can you help me out with that? I'm not sure.
I apologize. I need to do more research on those from the previous years. But I know that there were those PLPs that we had, and those have been included. They've been enveloped into the budgets. So they were not removed.
I'm not sure what you're saying.
So I think we had, so I'm not quite fully up to speed on the previous PLPs, but I know that there were these additional budget requests in the past for one-time expenditures. And I know several of them have been continually included in the budget, looking for ongoing revenue.
Well,
is
for
that
example, debt service payments can be aligned with one-time only money. It's a good use of that, or other capital expenses. I'm just wondering if there was any of that kind of approach to this budget.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, we did not utilize one-time revenues for those kind of expenditures.
Mm-hmm. It's a good use of one-time only money.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Feely?
Thank you. Gary, I want to go back a year. When we were approving the current year budget, we talked about some sort of bottom-up review. You called it zero base. We discussed the merits of zero base. But what happened to that concept? Did that ever come to fruition?
No. I attempted to do that with the budget team, and there were some systems and processes that just weren't in place to help facilitate that. and I simply couldn't get it to move forward as I'd hoped.
Okay. So I would like to comment on some things Elizabeth said that I think are very positive going forward and that will help you with any sort of bottom-up review. One is the forecasting software. I mean, we've all seen the pitfalls of not having a good forecasting system. So improving that's incredible. The new budget software, replacing brass, that's great. And Elizabeth and I had a conversation about combining the chart of accounts, which is kind of a, nebulous kind of thing to the casual observer, but to those of us who do finance, having a single chart of accounts across the county is critical in examining your expenditures. And I think the eventual looking at the ERP is critical for you guys as well. And Elizabeth and I talked about just getting these other systems in place and getting the staff involved in more modern practices before you go down the ERP path, because that is a huge change to the organization and you need to be ready for it. So I do have some concerns about this budget proposal. I don't think it's going to last very long. I mean, we heard the state forecast, I don't know, it was last week or the week before, $10 billion over 5 years. And we've got some organizations in the county that are heavily reliant on state funding. I mean, they're going to be hit further than they're hit already. So y'all are going to be back working on this budget. And the sooner you do that, the sooner you know, the better. I've been involved in mid-year budget cuts before. If you wait to cut $1 in January, you've got to cut $2 because half that money's already out the door. So the sooner you do that, the better. I would like the budget committee to be involved, but that's really up to the board. And I think it's important you make a decision because quite frankly, when we pop in just periodically, we're not really informed like the supplemental budget. I don't think I've even gotten a copy of a supplemental budget in 4 years. So if you'd like us involved, let's do it. I'm willing, if we have to meet monthly, that'd be great. I'm also concerned about property tax revenues. Normally they're very stable. It's the most stable revenue you have. In times like this, delinquency rates on property taxes tend to go up. And how much that's going to be, but we're already hearing about renters having trouble paying rent, where people are not paying their mortgage payments in great amounts. So I think that's maybe something we can get the assessor to talk a little bit about when they're up. And then I understand you're looking at options for the courthouse. So is tomorrow when non-departmental is up, is that the best time to talk about those options?
Yes,
Okay.
Either that or during the county administration presentation.
Okay, because I did have several questions. They weren't on this latest list that was sent out, but so I'll hold off on those. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Jan Lee?
Yes, I listened to the state economist when he reported to the interim committees, and the numbers out there are pretty outstanding with $3 billion right away that will be lost by June of next year, $4 billion the next biennium, and on up to that 10.5. And that's something that forecasting software is really not going to be able to deal with because this crisis is out of all ordinary means. But one of the things that I would like to do is after the state does decide how they're going to spend their money, which probably will occur in June, we should have a meeting and then look at the budget again because there'll probably be some fairly significant cuts. One of the questions that I asked was how much state money is in our budget to just give some kind of indication of where we might be on that. That's my question.
Elizabeth, do you know offhand?
About 16% of our revenue is from state funding.
Okay. Commissioner Bernard?
One thing, when Paul started his questioning, he used the word structurally balanced, and you said yes. We're structurally sustainable. We're not, but balanced we are. correct?
Correct. So we have a balanced budget. We've had a balanced budget in the 10 years I've been in Clackamas County. We have what I call a structural deficit, which means structurally our expenses continue to outpace our revenues. That is different from a balanced budget. We have a balanced budget. We have had a balanced budget. That's required by law. But I call it a structural deficit. If there's a better word to use, Elizabeth, help me. But structurally, we're continuing to outpace revenues. That's the term I use.
Yeah, I think the word structurally sustainable, we are not. But I mean, just the word say we're not balanced worries me. People will just pick on that. That $250,000 grant program, originally I thought, you know, we should eliminate this. But after the COVID virus issue, we have a lot of people hungry out there. And I think, I think first of all, we need to make sure people can eat. And so for me, I thought we should put that back in, just so you know, it's back in for that purpose. Countywide, we have a huge problem. You know, the other thing is, I don't have a crystal ball, and it doesn't make any sense to try to guess what's going to happen in the future. There's still CARES Act money that will be available to us. It's basically we send an invoice and they give us the money. The challenge that I heard yesterday is our software is a nightmare and makes it very difficult to make sure you're doing the right thing, because if you do it wrong, you have to pay it back. So we have to be very cautious on what we bill them for. But the CARES Act offers a lot of opportunity. I believe probably 3 weeks ago, we had spent about $3 million in additional expenses, and that's what that money is actually going to be FEMA money, which is 2 to 3 years out. So there is money coming in the future. But you know, I think we just have to be careful to make sure that we obviously the budget committee needs to be involved as soon as we find out what the governor's budget cuts will be. And whatever we can do to get close to that, I think we can throw a dart at the dartboard and get just as good an answer. So thank you.
Commissioner Humberston? You're on mute, Commissioner.
Wanted to remind people of the discussions that we had last year around this subject of the balanced budget and sustainability budget. And that was one of our objectives, was to not lay off any people in the process of right-sizing this budget, which meant also keeping the vacancies that we currently have. And frankly, if necessary, as more people leave for one reason or another, continue to keep or increase those vacancies. Because if we have to lay off people, it's going to make the overall economic situation worse, not better. And it makes it more difficult for us to deliver the very services that people are going to need during an economic downturn. So I want to remind everybody that was the discussion that we had last time. The other thing was that in order to get to to not have to do layoffs and get to a sustainable budget going forward on a longer term basis, we would do somewhere around a 3-year glide path, if you will, to a sustainable budget with several percent a year of cuts. And this was obviously the first year of that. So those were the discussions that I recall us having last year, and that we had settled on. And I haven't heard anything that suggests we should do it any differently until or unless we know what happens at the state and federal level and that income. That obviously is the unknown question, and we're not going to know the answer to that until we know what the state budget is and what they are actually going to give us. I do like the idea of regular meetings with our budget committee so that we get the input of the other 5 members of this commission, or committee, I should say. But I just wanted to remind people what the discussions were and what we had settled on last year when we got a balanced budget.
Commissioner Schrader?
I'll be pretty short. When we talk about a roadmap, I think we have to realize that we're going to have to be very fluid because the nature and the terrain of the road keeps changing. So it's just a metaphor that came to mind as we were talking about a roadmap. So you're going down one pathway and then suddenly a volcano explodes. I mean, it's kind of an interesting way to look at it. So I do agree with Ken. I think that we have done a good job implementing cuts via not filling vacancies. But I'm just going to implore people to understand that the roadmap is going to constantly be changing, I think, because it's just so uncertain out there right now. And I don't know if, Elizabeth, there are formulas where you can build in that level of uncertainty as we move forward. So thanks.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, just quickly, Gary, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I wrote it down when you said it. You did say two words, a structural deficit, and you also said structurally not balanced. And so I know Commissioner Bernard asked for that clarification. I heard you say it, just want to get clear. And again, I know I'm putting you on the spot. I don't mean to, but is the budget structurally balanced or not?
The budget, look, I will apologize because I know people will use what I said and use it against what is not accurate. So the budget is balanced. The proposed budget you have before you is balanced. We have a structural sustainable issue, not a balanced budget issue. I don't know how other many ways to say it. We have a balanced budget. This proposed budget is balanced. We do not have a sustainable budget, meaning expenses outpace revenues, and it should not be the case.
Yeah. So, and I appreciate what my colleagues have said, but there's another way maybe of just framing this is that I know we've taken some one-time monies and we've backfilled. I know that we're taking some unfilled positions and we're eliminating those from the budget, so that helps. But really, the core issue is that whatever we're doing, whether it's materials and services or personnel, whatever, that what we're spending is more than we're collecting in tax revenue or revenues, period. So if we're going to get ourselves in a path to recovery, we need to start cutting somewhere to get on a path. And that's the roadmap I'm talking about. If there is no cuts and we keep on, and expenses keep on outpacing revenues, we are going the wrong way.
Mr. Feely?
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I know we're running out of time. I think there's a huge difference between the annual budget, which according to Oregon budget law needs to be balanced, and a forecasting period. I mean, the forecast period, whether it be 3, I would suggest 5, sort of lays out the structural issues the county faces over that time period and allows you to make adjustments in each of the fiscal years where you adopt a budget. And you can make certain strategies to, like Gary's talked about, like coming to sustainability over a longer period of time. I just think it's important to focus on the forecast, and you're making progress on that. I mean, without a good forecast, you're just kind of dead in the water. But that's a different tool than the annual budget. I mean, the budget has to be balanced. I mean, the Department of Revenue won't accept it if it's not balanced. So hopefully that helps.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, and if I may, before we go on to the next questioner, we still have 2 people that had questions. And I just want to, I think what I'm going to try to have us do, because we do tend to go over and they're good questions and we need to get them, voiced. So let's be cautious about redundancies. And also if there are things that staff may have to look up for us, then let them bring that to us later. If there's a question that comes up that we could have answered now, but it hasn't happened, then let's make sure we make note of that. So before we get to the end of the budget process, we can revisit some of those questions that may come up. And they may come up because of other presentations too, and especially when it comes to the overall budget. So what I think is probably going to happen, and I just want to just check in with all the rest of you, is our breaks may be shorter and our lunchtime may be shorter, because we do want to get to all of the department discussions and ask really salient questions. So we've got, I think, 2 more. Drenda, is that right?
Right.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
I believe I'm up, is that right? So I just wanted to, I think this conversation is important because this is the framing of the big picture of the entire budget. But I do want to mention that we have been, quote unquote, cutting through our vacancy savings, which when you look at where most of our money goes, it's to people and to those costs. So we are making those adjustments. And we did have that discussion, Gary, with the budget committee about, do we do this very quickly or do we do it more gradual over time? And we agreed that we would do it over the next few years instead of dramatically all at once. And right now is not the time to be doing dramatic things because we're in a dramatic time with COVID, and things are going to naturally come to the top of what is our key priority. And that's where we're going to need to be focusing. We need to be nimble and flexible and adaptable, at the same time looking to do things as efficiently and effectively as possible.
Mr. Humberston?
Yeah, I wanted to, the way things have been phrased seems to indicate that we haven't done any cuts. And so I'd like to ask Elizabeth to give us a gross number, if she doesn't have it at her fingertips right now, sometime during the day, of the amount of cuts that have actually been made dollar-wise over getting to last year's balanced budget and getting to this year's balanced budget. Because I'm looking in here and I've seen cuts all the way through this budget in various and sundry departments and lines of expenditure. And just looking at the budget message alone, expenses in material and services cut by 8.8%, allocated costs cut by 2.1%, capital outlay by 11.4%. We know that we've had somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 positions kept vacant, which is obviously a reduction in expenditure. So I don't want the public who is watching this to think that there has not been any cuts. Now the question going forward is how much more cutting do we have to do? And that's going to be balanced, as I understand it, against what are the revenues that we get. And we don't know the exact amount of revenues that we are going to get from the state or the federal government, or frankly, even from our property tax revenues, because we don't know what the delinquency rate is going to be. So, and I'm not sure there's any way to forecast that with any great degree of certainty, which means, going back to my original statements earlier, we do need to meet with the budget committee on a regular basis so that we're in a position to adjust as quickly as possible as we get accurate information as to what our income is. But any suggestion that there has not been cuts is incorrect. There have been a tremendous amount of cuts. I would like to know what the gross number is at your convenience.
Thank you. And you're hired. Very well stated on all of that. I just know off the top, I can share that last year's budget was a $12 million reduction. And this year we have a $6.1 million reduction. And future, as you well stated, really depends on our revenues that come in and what the demands are on those revenues going forward.
Thank you.
Good points. Thank you all. And other questions regarding the overall budget and the process that we may want to know, if, be sure you capture those, write them down, and, let's at some point through the next couple of days get them to Gary and Elizabeth, and, we can get that information back. I have another process question as we begin the department reviews. in the past, especially the past few years, we've taken for each department, if it's scheduled like for an hour, we've said, okay, a 30-minute presentation and then 30 minutes for Q&A. Have we done the same thing this year as the departments were queued up to do their presentations?
Yeah, yes, we have, Chair. I'm sorry, Elizabeth. All departments, the time they're allotted, they have half of that time to present. And I'll ask if the committee would please hold your questions and allow them to present, and then the other
Yes.
half of time for questions.
Yes, and thank you for that, Gary, because I think it's important that they go through their presentation. They certainly may, in that, they'll answer some of the questions that you may have. And then they'll also be answering any of the questions that we posed ahead of time. So I appreciate that also.